Recently, on the main channel, I released a video about Final Fantasy I, and I thought it would be fun on Ice Rider to do a ranking of that game's 6 classes. Not a tier list because, there's not enough classes to make a full and proper tier list, but a ranking from worst to best for all the classes in Final Fantasy I. I don't have a particular version of the game in mind, which might seem a little bit odd since a lot of the classes got buffed in the transition from the NES to the various remakes, but even with the relative changes in strength, I think the order of how desirable or undesirable they are maintains the same regardless of what version you're on. So without any further ado, let's dive in. In last place, surprising absolutely no one, is the Thief. In the original Famicom version of Final Fantasy I, the Thief is almost worthless. He's basically a strictly worse fighter who promotes into a strictly worse version of the Red Mage. Not even Red Wizard, Red Mage. In remakes, he got buffed such that agility is a lot more important, and the Thief is basically a free runaway button, which can be nice, especially for prolonged dungeons if you're afraid of eating into your resources by fighting a lot of monsters that you otherwise wouldn't have to. And while his damage output will still be worse than the Knight and Black Belt, it's not going to be laughably bad. In part because, even with weaker weapons, the Thief's high accuracy and high number of attacks help him kind of keep up. But ultimately, the Thief just doesn't offer anything you can't get better elsewhere. Upon promoting to Ninja at the halfway point of the game, access to Haste and Temper is nice, but you can pretty easily get these spells on other classes. And at that late point in the game, the low-level offensive spells that the Thief learns are just not going to be useful. You are past the point where a basic fire spell does anything worth noting to enemies you should be fighting. The Thief isn't quite dead weight, but they are about as close as you can get while still contributing. And I would argue there is very little reason to put one on your team unless you just like the class, which fair enough. For number 5, I have the Black Mage, and it's not because Black Mage is necessarily a particularly bad role, but instead because they are almost entirely outclassed by Red Mage in every entry. Black Mage focuses on offensive spells and gets access to 2 of the best buffs in the game, Temper and Haste, although only Haste is useful in the NES version because Temper is bugged. Black Mage also gets access to offensive spells, which are useful for high defense enemies, and they can use AoE attacks against large numbers of generic folks in order to kill them all quickly. These are useful attributes to have on your team, but the big problem is the Black Mage isn't the only one who can perform this role. Red Mages are positioned as a hybrid between Fighter, Black Mage, and White Mage, being okay at all 3 roles, but not great at any individual one. But while this is true for Fighter and White Mage, I would argue Red Mage is almost as effective at the Black Magic role as a Black Mage is. They learn spells a little bit later than the Black Mage, but not enough to make a huge difference, especially for the most important spells. And in the remakes, Red Mages will have slightly lower magic damage than Black Mages do, but the decreased damage is not extreme enough to make up for everything else a Red Mage offers their party. And as such, Black Mage is almost strictly outclassed. To put things in perspective, the Red Mage doesn't miss a single black magic spell until level 6. And even then, the spells they miss are Death, Quake, and Stun, each of which are pretty low value spells in my opinion. If you really want to get as many charges of Thundaga as soon as possible, Black Mage is going to do that for you, but I think if you have patience, the Red Mage is just a better option. In 4th place, I have the White Mage, and you might think that she is down here because she's similarly outclassed by the Red Mage, but I actually think that is not the case. Sure, the red mage can do some amount of spot healing, but the white mage's most desirable attributes are actually not attainable by her colleague in red. You see, the cure spell and other single target healing spells lose their effectiveness as soon as you get the economy to buy a ton of potions. Instead, I think the biggest things the white mage brings to the table are her group healing spells, her revival spells, and her anti-undead offensive attacks, each of which are exclusive to her and cannot be learned by red mages. And to clarify, by revival spells, I specifically mean full life, which can only be used by the white wizard, since life can still be used by red wizards, but it revives the target at 1 HP, so it's just strictly worse than a Phoenix Down. White mages definitely get worse the more of them you add to a team, but I think a single one will pull their weight if you put them on your squad of 4. In third place, I have the Monk, and I think this is the first class you can justify adding multiple of to your team. Monks are incredibly simple. They are damage dealers and nothing else. With their bare hands, monks get access to a special formula such that their damage output goes up exponentially as their level rises. And as such, they start out pretty underpowered, but eventually snowball into the biggest damage dealers in the game, even stronger than the knight with best equipment. Monks are a very turn your brain off class. They do nothing but click the attack button, but they click the attack button very effectively. And as a bonus, since monks don't actually want any weapons or armor, your economy gets easier to manage with one of them in your squad. There's not much else to say though. Monks are very one-dimensional characters. And now that brings us to the two big dogs. In second place, I have the Red Mage, the most powerful and versatile of the casters. Red Mage gets access to almost every black magic spell in the game, but has better offensive stats than the Black Mage and can equip significantly better weapons and armor, thusly making them almost a strict upgrade over the Black Mage. Because of how ridiculous haste and temper are, this alone would probably be enough to put Red Mage in the top 2 or at the very least top 3 classes, but as a added bonus, they also get access to some white magic. They miss most of White Mage's best spells, but single target healing and defensive buffs like Protect and Blink can be useful, especially during the early game where your economy can be a little bit rougher, so buying a ton of potions and status curing items isn't exactly in the cards without excessive grinding. I think almost every team wants a Red Mage. They just compress so much useful stuff into a single party slot. But of course, the best class in Final Fantasy I is the Fighter. On the NES, the Fighter was so strong that people would legitimately run groups of 4 without even considering it a challenge run. Fighter can equip the best weapons and armor in the game, meaning that they output a ton of damage, and they're incredibly hard to kill. They're usually best when backed up by support units like Red Mage or White Mage, but against most opponents, physical damage is more than enough to take them down. Upon promoting, Knights get access to some low-level white magic, and I guess healing spells or defensive buffs can be nice in the same way that Ninja getting haste and temper is cool, but at the end of the day, it's not super useful. Their magical capabilities are not the appeal of Knights. Instead, it's just having someone to give all of the awesome weapons and armor you find in dungeons to. Much like Monk, Fighter is pretty straightforward. There's not too much to say other than they are good at combat, but being good at combat, as it turns out, is a desirable attribute in most RPGs. So yeah, here is my list, and next to it, I have the chat rankings. I've been running a series of polls on the main channel to try to figure out what order y'all rank the classes in, and you had some interesting takes. You still have Thief on the bottom and Fighter on the top, so it's fine by me, but I was kind of confused with Black Mage as the number 2, above both Black Belt, Red Mage, and White Mage. I consider Black Mage to be pretty underwhelming in Final Fantasy 1, so maybe there's some tech I'm missing, or maybe people just like it because it's iconic. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this. Bye-bye!